Here's to courageous pioneers who understand a legacy is multifaceted. Whether you are an independent entrepreneur or someone who is part of a family business, you too can leave something of value behind for a greater purpose. Perhaps your legacy will improve workplace cultures, seize authentic moments, or inspire others with your talent. Your host, Angelina Carleton, is the founder of Design Your Legacy, a boutique advisory firm based in Beverly Hills, California. She is a mentor and coach to leaders like you and has contributed to Alliance, a philanthropy magazine, as well as to Women in Family Business. She has been recognized by Los Angeles Biz as an LA Woman of Influence, as well as by World HRD Congress for her work. Remember, you deserve great coaching because your legacy is worth completing.
What if you could further your knowledge of trust as well as trust management to build upon our prior two podcasts? I'd like to welcome back Howard Hinman, my good friend. He is joining us today from the Las Vegas, Nevada area to talk further about trust. Welcome, Howard.
Thank you.
It is my pleasure to bring you on back once more as a guest. And I wanted to chat with you this lovely afternoon because there's about $30 trillion that are going to pass by the end of the decade, but more specifically about, I would say in the next 3 to 5 years, to the female population who isn't always included in financial conversations, financial discussions, although that is changing today. So again, there's an unprecedented amount of assets that will shift into the hands of U.S. women over the next 3 to 5 years. So I think the challenge is both education and finding that support system. And I know that you're going to give a disclaimer in a moment that you're not an attorney, you're a trained paralegal, but I just wanted to set the groundwork, the context of why we are having this conversation today. Because just like lottery winners lose friends, lose the money, and so forth, there is a shift and a lack of support. So where would you like to start, Howard?
Please note, ladies and gentlemen, and our very gracious host, that I'm a paralegal, not an attorney. Nothing in this talk or any of my presentation is ever to be taken as financial, investment, tax, and or legal advice, or typically unless specifically identified political and or sports thoughts. With that noted, I actually, before COVID, did pattern dancing. There are 3 types of pattern dancing. Contra, square, and a regency, which is an English ballroom dance, where they do not have swings. The most intimate thing they do is an arm turn. And through that, I met a lady from San Diego who is probably in her late 40s, early 50s by now. And she adopted with her then husband 2 children. And basically she had, although she was a trained nurse, she had exactly 0 financial knowledge. He ran the checkbook, et cetera, and the whole marriage blows up and she gets a financial wake-up call. The answer is, in some ways it's good because if you haven't been miseducated, you can be educated properly. The issue is you require major amounts of education.
Yes. So perhaps we could start with the Declaration of Trust document in the context of trust. So this conversation today will cover different terms regarding financial literacy, but I thought that we would start with the Declaration of Trust because that oftentimes is the backbone of the trust finder and the trust itself. What say you, Howard?
The trust indenture, which is prepared by the grantor and the key personnel, sometimes with the assistance of counsel, is setting the goal. And if you go to the website www.passingbooks.com, you see from December 17th, 2020, Gwen Wyckoff discussing how your goal of a trust is you will set it up in your 20s or 30s in order that you look back in your 70s and 80s and say, I'm taking marvelous care of my grandchildren.
Yes.
Because the goal is to get legacy wealth, or as she says in that talk at the Carl Hess Club, and she's wearing red as I recall, perpetual wealth.
Yes.
And she has a fairy in a bottle and all kinds of wonderful little items.
And it often takes about one generation, which could be about 20 years, to build the ideal team of the right mentors, the seasoned professional trustees, and so forth. But let me circle back for a moment to the Declaration of Trust. So when written well, it places restrictions on the trust principals.
Right.
So they can't just come in and, let's say, make decisions and change the future direction of the income, or the original beneficiaries, let's say, replacing them. And I'm bringing up the Declaration of Trust or the trust indenture because sometimes somebody could remarry, and that new individual can sometimes have carte blanche compared to a checks and balances in place.
We only use the revenue word, not the I word, for the record.
Correct. Okay. In
any case, it is the economist David Friedman, the son of Milton. It's David D. Friedman, who said, the trick in constructing any legal document is to both give it enough rigidity to be solid and enough flexibility to allow for changing conditions.
Yes.
That is the fine art. And for instance, there are spendthrift clauses in almost every trust, not merely the irrevocable common law trust, to make sure that the second wife, third wife, whatever it is not,
or husband these days,
her husband is not unduly favored. Yes, absolutely. Also, and I think we touched upon this before, the biggest issue in any trust is addictive behavior by beneficiaries.
Absolutely. And so
the number one issue. The number two issue is cars, trucks, automobiles, and that's covered in What Color Is Your Chariot, which is now available as an audio presentation through Authors Republic, and is a no-charge article on the website www.passingbooks.com.
Fantastic, great. And I know another point that is covered in Volume 1, which we're chatting about today, because Volume 2 is more of the technical data, is
the skilled person and the professional in the field.
Sure, okay. Is how valuable it is to have two trustees to sign on documents, instruments, and so forth, financial instruments, in order to protect the estate. So when there are two trustees, there is the sufficient checks and balances in place compared to that idea of a new spouse or a new individual coming in and taking the reins of that trust and all of the corpus or assets within that trust. So this idea of having two people, not just delegating it to one. And sometimes there can be a team of trustees, such as an aggressive team of trustees that can find investments and so forth. But I just wanted to highlight this point.
The most critical single item in a trust is to get 5 or 6 excellent people who are basically no closer than a first cousin. Ideally, you have 3 trustees, a bookkeeper, never the A word, a general manager. The general manager is the person assigned to increase the trust corpus, who could be the grantor, and then the executive secretary. A large trust will have not only general manager, it will have assistant general managers whose sole job is to protect the corpus and increase it.
Yes. Any other thoughts about the Declaration of Trust before I read off a quote?
A typical Declaration of Trust is going to run between 20 and 40 pages.
Fantastic. Okay.
And is the powers clause, which all trusts have, which is basically what the trustees can and cannot do. For instance, can the trust invest in cryptocurrency?
This is important to write out.
Or is it restricted only to high-grade municipal bonds or something like that?
Or sports teams.
Blue chips. Incidentally, I'm told that if you know what you're doing, racehorses are an excellent investment. Although I'm not the guy to ask which horse to take in the 5th. That's why I do not give sports advice.
Good. I'm glad you're laughing about that. Another key point about the beneficiary or of the Declaration of Trust is addressing the beneficiary needs broadly and seriously, compared to having nonchalant assignments. What say you, Howard, before I read a
It's
lengthy quote?
very important that the trust personnel be paid, and typically slightly above market rate, in order that you get their attention. And they do an excellent job for the beneficiaries. Remember, as Gwen Wyckoff has said, and I have said, the purpose of a trust is to benefit the beneficiaries, whether they're human, whether they're a cause, etc. All those things.
Yes. Okay. And I want to define trust for a moment, again, just to lay the groundwork, compared to presuming that there is a listener that knows, because everybody has a first day. So this is a quote that I wanted to read from Volume 1 by Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was alive between 1809 to 1894. And the quote reads, "Do not put your trust in money, but put your money in trust." And I think this is highlighting the value of trust, which again, oftentimes attorneys are not always thoroughly trained in this in law school, nor is this commonplace conversation at the local coffee shop. So
typically these days, attorneys are, instead of being trained in trusts, are trained in environmental or riparian water law.
Or statutes and codes.
Right. And if you get out west, it's more mining. Those are the people.
In regards to trust?
No, as regard to what they're trained in.
Oh, at law school.
They'll have much more. Back east, you're talking environmental and riparian law, and then as you get further west, you get more into mining, as in silver, gold, copper, whatever.
Very nice. So the definition of a trust, just as a reference point for today's conversation, and this is not out of Black's Law or Bouvier's or any of those other law dictionaries, is a collection of assets transferred into financial accounts under the name of a family trust, for instance, managed for the benefit of the family members or other appointed people and groups. So I just wanted to lay that groundwork because, again, if somebody walks into a bank and they want to open up a trust account, this, again, could be like a foreign language to them. So
right. Basically, you have a situation, there are approximately 17 different types of trust in common use. The most common would be the testamentary trust created by last will and testament. I have seen, where I grew up in Anaheim, California, the old Anaheim Cemetery was run by a trust until it went bankrupt and the county ended up taking it over. And now the taxpayers of Orange County have the pleasure of maintaining that cemetery. And that had a very clear purpose. The only purpose of that trust was the upkeep and care and maintenance of that cemetery. That was it.
Good. Very nice real life example. So I wanted to take a moment and walk down history lane. If you could just bear with me, I'm going to rattle off some facts to set the context. Okay. So around 400 BC, Plato used a trust to form a sovereign university in Greece. And trusts date back to the Egyptian pharaohs. In ancient Rome, only citizens inherited property. When a Roman chose a foreigner as his heir, and that's spelled H-E-I-R, he could use a fide commissum, which is like today's common law trust. And how did I butcher that Latin, Howard? The fide commissum.
I'm not sure if it's butcher. My two foreign languages were French, Spanish, a tiny bit of Russian, and a tiny bit of German.
Okay.
And I'm attempting to learn Arabic as well, a little bit.
So, all right. Well, speaking
now to go to that, go back to Egypt.
Okay.
I believe the guy's name was Christian Joseph. I ran like an 8-series of novels, four in each series, about the building of the pyramids. And the Egyptians were actually, in my opinion, as somewhat of a historian, were actually more advanced than the Greeks. Women had rights, they could own property. They were excellent in things like mathematics and chemistry, far ahead of the Greeks. There was a jury by 14. And even Pharaoh was above the law, and the death penalty was rare in ancient Egypt. If you're going to live someplace, ancient Egypt in that time period was the place to be. When Homer The blind poet Homer, the Greek poet, when he was exiled, Pharaoh gave him shelter.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
We should conduct the rest of today's conversation in Sumerian. Okay.
Lagash and Sumer is where the term freedom arises, according to Bob Lefebvre.
Well, I think it's important. I think it's
kind of like a father to me.
Okay, I think
it's a whole other story.
Okay, I think it's important to know the history because oftentimes it's left out in today's commercialism world of commerce. Okay, so then in the medieval England time frame, the Mortimer Acts of 1279 A.D., also known as Statutum de Viris Releg Osius, again my Latin is butchered there, which had a trustee under bond where they could hold the title and handle land. It was a way to ENFEOFF. It's a way to transfer the legal title of land while holding the use of the land for the Seskake use. Some of the listeners might know about Seskake Trust, but that is outside of today's chat. The Feoffer, Feoffer, is known today as the beneficiary. So holding title or the lease to land under English common law carried many obligations. But before one gets excited about this medieval time period, sometimes it didn't work out for the knights. Scholars of medieval English land law noted the religious groups were among the first to employ this use extensively. So what I'm referring to is oftentimes the knight could get into the benefit of having land, but there were political games that he would have to be connected to, and it was more of a headache sometimes. Then the Massachusetts Trust, also known as Business Trust, offered benefits of a common law trust, and it was not a government-granted charter. A trust, quote, teaches the lessons of interdependence, cooperation, and working together for the common good. And the North American Land Company, created during the 1776 era, still remains today in existence. And one of the things for any of the Americans out there who are listening, Patrick Henry set up several trusts which are now in existence still today, more than 250 years old. And the original patriot set up family trusts and trained successive generations regarding trust management. So almost a little bit of a lost art regarding the family unit. When I look out into the world today, Howard, oftentimes I'm seeing the family unit being broken down. But let me get over to 1947. The Chicago Merchandise Mart is a pure trust established by Joseph Kennedy. As we know, Robert Kennedy Jr. is running for presidential office today in 2024. And John D. Rockefeller created more than 270 pure equity trusts to keep his assets and empire sovereign. And I know you made a comment to me that something about Turks and Caicos Island around 1917.
I am told that in 1917, that John D. Rockefeller, would be senior, created what were called 270 colettos. And a coletto is kind of like a Massachusetts trust. It's a bearer stock company like they used to or may still have in Liechtenstein. And basically, you don't know who the owner is. The equivalent of the trust capital units will be whoever has it in their hand actually owns the coletto. And that was to get around the pesky things that happened in 1913. It's the best guess is the Rockefeller family offshored all their assets over a century ago.
Yes,
or the majority of them.
And to any of the listeners, Liechtenstein is a country in Europe which has favorable trust laws, in addition to Panama in Central America. So, Howard, what do you think, now that I've rattled off some context of the history related to trust and some key points, what do you think an heir is up against today, realistically, whether they own or they're in a business, or they would like to start a business with seed capital from an inheritance?
The goal, and I've said this publicly, of certain people, primarily back east, is to create a situation which is all too common, rags to riches to rags in 3 generations.
Teacups to teacups.
Yeah, teacups to teacups, except
to the stars,
teacups,
to the stallions, and back to the, yeah.
Yes. In any case,
So the stalls, from the stalls to the stars and back to the stalls. I think that's the Italian metaphor.
I'm certain that your Italian is better than mine. My Italian is basically piano, forte, etc., etc. There's no getting. I mean, let's be blunt, or let me be frank. In United States and Canada, your folks are the powers that are not really looking for competition, financial or otherwise, and quite frankly, you might be better off going to another common law jurisdiction solely as a paralegal. However, if you wish to stay, then it's vital that you know how to play the game and that you understand how to amass assets and deploy them properly, which is the job, the task of the general manager and the assistant general managers in a trust.
So before I connect the U.S. Constitution to this conversation, how would one go about finding good professional trustees that they can trust?
That is the most difficult item. I understand that back in Boston, there are professional trustees and they start at like $300 an hour. And these people like were in the Peace Corps and they have masters and PhDs.
Are you talking about the Boston Brahmins, or is there another?
Yeah, like the Boston Brahmins. I've said this publicly, therefore I'll repeat it. The goal of the powers that are is to make sure this knowledge is restricted to a few high-price, high-powered East Coast law firms in places like Toronto, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and maybe Atlanta, and maybe Chicago. They do not want the middle and upper middle class to know this, which is why it's important you go to the website www.passingducks.com and educate yourself.
Which is interesting because 2/3 of today's affluent are self-made. So they're hungry and they're motivated and they're willing to do the work.
We're about the only source available to the layperson right now. There's very few people in this business.
And yet there are individuals that have reached out to your organization and gathering information so that they can have well-rounded knowledge and information. And there's even a great book, The Trustee's Handbook by Loring, that's spelled Loring. So let me go for a moment and just touch base on this idea of Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution, that our ability to enter into contracts ought not to be impaired.
Right.
And the trust rules stand superior in forming private law as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
Would you speak more on this?
Solely as a paralegal, the irrevocable common law trust will work in any common law country with modifications, and any civil law country where it has been imported. For instance, we had a gentleman who was looking to import the irrevocable common law trust to Mexico. I can also tell you solely as a paralegal, Mexico, yes, the Amigo country. I am told by people who've attempted it that because Quebec is a civil law country, that Alaska irrevocable common law trust do not work there. They will work in Ontario, they'll work in the Maritimes, they'll work out west in the Prairie provinces, and they'll work in British Columbia. They simply do not work effectively in Quebec.
And Quebec is a province in Canada, just for any of the young listeners out there.
Capital city, Quebec City, and the most famous city is Montreal. For revenue purposes, tax or trusts are disregarded in Spain. They're not effective in Spain. Simply not. They will not do you any good in Spain.
Yes.
Where the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain.
And I also just wanted to highlight, whether you like some of the names that we've mentioned or not, it's just learning from their good decisions. One of the good decisions of a banker known as J.P. Morgan was at age 13, he acted as ambassador. And I could bring up somebody such as Meghan Markle, and many people don't know that she served in an ambassador capacity. I'm not sure if it was Spain or Portugal, but it was something that she did during or right after her college years in being able to establish her network, whether that's the finance and trade connections, finding mentors. So something to the seasoned, or not to the seasoned, but to the young listeners out there to consider, perhaps considering working as an ambassador for those political skills or those networking skills.
And obviously, learn your foreign language or your second and third language. Certainly English is good. That's not the first language. The first language of the planet more people speak in anything is Chinese. And then the other ones would be French, Spanish, Italian, German, perhaps Arabic. Certainly I would encourage all the listeners who have any aptitude for language to pursue it.
I think Ivanka Trump is teaching her children and herself Mandarin or Cantonese.
It's the number one language as far as users in the world, and because of the number of overseas Chinese who also speak Mandarin, it's quite useful. Again, English is a second language. I am told that in Malaysia, where they speak Mandarin Chinese, the King's English, no longer the Queen's English, sadly, and then Malay, which they share with Indonesia, it's called Indo-Malay, that you can do the following. They're trilingual. One person will start the conversation off in Malay, the second person will answer in Mandarin, and the third person will reply, or the first person will reply in English within the same paragraph. It's amazing.
Well, that's international business for you right there. So I just wanted to circle back for a moment to the trust's reason for being. It's to protect the interests of the beneficiaries. The trust allows for maximum tax advantages under the law, and in a revocable trust, the trustee can be the grantor, even though I know that you recommend an irrevocable trust in the Volume 1 and Volume 2 for specific reasons.
A irrevocable common law trust with enough fudge factor to allow the trustees, and they're aided by the trust staff, to have some discretion. Again, that's what David D. Freeman said. It's the right amount of discretion, not too little and not too less. Kind of the Goldilocks effect.
Yes. So let me circle back for a moment regarding the foundation and getting the proper baby steps in place. So one of the key questions to explore related to trust is, what is the scope and purity of your purpose? And this may not be a known nor a fixed quantity. So I wondered, Howard, if you would give the listener some examples of individuals who came up with a great scope and purity of purpose.
The Cemetery Trust, I know, and it's not an irrevocable common law trust. I know of a gentleman whose children were going to the Westminster Unified School District in Orange County, California, and it's not the same thing. However, he set up a 501c3 nonprofit whose sole purpose was to benefit that school district. But that would be spot on purpose. For instance, one might have a trust for the benefit of the local cats and dogs. That would be clarity of purpose. Anything where, again, the purpose of a trust is to benefit the beneficiary. It is not about the revenue or the T word. It's not and we say that, and we said it over again. The primary purpose of the trust is to benefit the beneficiaries. Whether they're human, whether they're animal, whether they're a cause. For instance, there are trusts in the Hawaiian Islands that are for the benefit of the Hawaiian natives who are a certain percentage native Hawaiian. That's a very excellent example of a trust.
Good. Okay. I wanted, before I asked you or bring up mindset, I want to circle back to mentors again. The value of mentors. If somebody can find them, however, through their network, through word of mouth and so forth, mentors oftentimes have a long-range view, and they understand the difficult and tricky financial world today. Also, how to handle relationships in that business world with finesse.
Angela, you know me that because I have, and this is public, it's on the website, www.passmindset.com, I have a lifetime history of morbid obesity. My number one thing that I would tell to my younger self is, Howard, go to someone like psychologist, the late Dr. Nathaniel Brandon, when you're in your late teens or early 20s, and get that under control. My second thing, which I tell my younger self, is, Howard, study more second and third languages. And the third thing, and which I would recommend everybody, is find better trainers and mentors.
And coaches,
Find
for that
the
matter. Go ahead.
coaches, trainers, mentors, coaches, whatever.
Advisors, yes.
Advisors. Find the person who is doing the best life that you would like to live and learn from them. And if possible, get them to coach you. And if necessary, hire them. And if you can't afford it yourself, get your parents or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle to hire it.
And to retain their services. That's great advice.
Yeah.
And I want to bring up that oftentimes with 2/3 of today's affluent being self-made, oftentimes they did not have a happy home life, which brings me to the next point before we speak about mindset, which is being able to bring your dream team together of mentors and professional trustees where there's a vested interest in a common goal, and to promote that vested interest where everybody benefits. And this idea of quarterly meetings to discuss finances, the education of future trustees and beneficiaries.
Where the protector may sit in if he or she wishes. I met about in the late 1980s, and I lost track of them, a gentleman named Nicky Nemiroff. And Nicky Nemiroff made his living originally at teaching people how to play better golf. And then he got into business coaching. And the most important thing that he discovered was that the business organization had a purpose statement and a mission statement. Well, he consulted through his originally golf things with an accountancy firm. And he discovered that 3 of the partners had similar goals, and partner number 4 had completely different goals. And he said, it is no wonder that the business is having difficulty. There's one person the goals are fundamentally different. That does not mean it's good or bad. It simply means that the goals are not compatible with each other.
Sure.
It's like you cannot have a square circle.
And
or attempting to put a square peg in a round hole. Does not work real well. It's a mechanical engineering issue.
And the tighter we are bound in supporting each other, the better our chances for survival.
Yes, you want, and indeed in the Ben Lowry interview from 2012 on the website www.passingbucks.com, basically Frank Ozak talked about how you want to cross-vest trusts, and you want to get trust from different areas investing in you, and you invest in trust from different areas, even different countries. For instance, United States, United Kingdom.
Yes.
Although most of the successful trusts I know of in Europe are actually in the Republic of Ireland. I personally know of.
Very interesting. Okay. So,
never had the pleasure of being any further east than Halifax, Nova Scotia.
So,
unfortunately.
Well, one day. We'll
yes.
get over to Ireland. Okay. So on mindset.
Please.
It's interesting that Hollywood has sold this idea of rugged individualism, whereas in real life, collective agreements influence the outcome and control the future. So financial leverage, let's say through group agreement, becomes a force. And I know that you, in Volume 1, have spoken about a well-known family, and we don't necessarily have to name them. If they'd like to purchase Volume 1, they can. But this particular family, who's well-known throughout history as a well-to-do family, old money, although they were self-made at one point, they benefited from family voting in blocks, also known as tribal strength of agreement. So when someone inherits a large sum of money, this definitely could be a new world to them and a new way of thinking.
Okay. Let me address that, if I may. Rugged individualism takes you to a certain point. Certainly it's useful on the frontier, in a survival situation, etc., etc. However, to build a community requires as Gwen Wyckoff would say, cohesion. And also to make a further clarification, I am not a contributor to The Art of Passing the Buck, either Volume 1 or Volume 2. I do have some articles up on the website, www.passingbucks.com, and I do have more video and audio presentations. There are approximately 13 contributors, of which about half are still with us.
Okay. Well, I just think it's interesting. So in rethinking ownership when it comes to trust, there's that balance between freedom and control. And I know that historically, Volume 1 refers to fiefdoms. Fiefdoms are from good old England, as well as pledges. And this idea about the knight versus the serf. Serf being spelled S-E-R-F. The knight had to deal with, again, political schemes that complicated his life, laden with responsibilities, and he was also dealing with many obligations. And yet, use is better than ownership. Tell me more, Howard.
It said that one of the Rockefellers said, or one of the R-word people said, own nothing, control and use everything. You do not care who owns it as long as you have the privilege of using it, which is why you want to get the best people that you can to be your trustee staff, who will safeguard, protect the items.
Yes.
For instance, when a senator from Massachusetts, now deceased, and this is in the December 17th presentation by Gwen Wyckoff, during the Q&A session, that's 2012. It's a few years back at the Carl Hess Club out Dinah's Restaurant in West Los Angeles near Culver City. Apparently the senator from a very large, prominent family back east had an unfortunate accident at a place called Chappaquiddick, and the family of the deceased young lady looked to sue him, and they discovered that he did not own any of his offices, did not own any of his homes, did not own any of his clothes, did not own the automobile in question, and essentially he had maybe a few clothes and a checking account, as I think Frank Ozek said, with $1.98 in it. In other words, there was nothing that they could. He was a very unattractive defendant.
He was not a mark.
And he was not a mark. Yes, when it's known that you have money, you become a mark. But that is one of the, and Gwen has talked about this and written about it. Essentially, a statutory trust is extremely dangerous because typically in some states, it's my understanding that you're required to publish the names of the beneficiaries and maybe their addresses. Well, basically, I understand that unscrupulous gentlemen will note, gee, baby girl is born to that wealthy family and they've established a trust for her. When she goes away to college in X number of years, I will go romance her. That supposedly has happened. That's kind of apocryphal.
Okay. Yes.
The point is that the other key thing besides benefit to fiduciary is privacy. Even if there were no revenue benefits, the privacy is vital. That's one of the things that the ruling elites wish to seek, is they want to destroy your privacy.
Well, I think that
they want your financial, et cetera. They want your medical information out. I mean, if I were running for president of the United States and I were filing a you-know-what return, why would I publicize that?
Well, it's
none of their business.
Yeah, that you're bringing up politicians. Oftentimes, politicians have blind trust, so they are trained. Some of them are trained in this, and pivoting our conversation.
The Romney family. This is the father of the current senator from Utah, Mitt Romney, and he was governor of Massachusetts before that. His father was a Republican presidential candidate many years ago, and he was a governor of Michigan. And before that, he had been the president of what was American Motors. I think the only thing that survives from that is the Jeep part of Stellantis, used to be named Chrysler. And when he ran for office, he was a very wealthy man, and he put all his assets into a blind trust. That's public record. That's about probably 1962. You can look that up. Yeah, it's the Romney family.
So.
Oh, yes. Blind trusts are very common for people who have money and are then going to run for political office. Very common.
Yes. And I think it's important to be able to differentiate between an equitable interest as the beneficiary, as well as that the trustee can hold legal title in what's known as divided title. And again, these are some of the terms in being able to navigate the landscape of trust. So if one does sit down with a professional, they can have the basics in their vocabulary and the terms.
Yes.
Mastered.
Split title, basically, Angelina, is that you have equitable title remains with the beneficiaries and the trustees have legal title.
Yes. Yes.
Really simple. And, of course, discussed in Volume 1 and Volume 2 and on our website, www.passingbucks.com.
So I know that we're going to draw it to a close in a little bit here, but I wanted to bring up again that one of the trends today is that women are becoming more so the breadwinners. Maybe it's just within America. I haven't read the statistics across the world, across the globe, but they are starting to have more assets as well as bringing in more of that I word, income. And I thought it's very interesting that a separate trust could be a very good idea when it comes to the strategy of a spouse receiving a distribution. So in other words, and this is so interesting today because with the number of daughters that are taking the helm of family businesses, the number of women, even baby boomers that are becoming widows as well as heirs, even divorced individuals. We can think about someone like Mackenzie Scott, who had been married to Jeff Bezos of Amazon, and the amount of inheritance. Well, I don't know if it would be inheritance in her case, but alimony. She receives some
alimony and spousal support, whatever.
Right, you're right. And so I just think it's interesting that there's this idea of, solving this proactively so that one spouse doesn't say, gosh, there's a financial inequity. The partner has way more than I do. And then they could end up staying just because they're financially comfortable or they're financially trapped. And I thought that this is a great idea to invest in so as to avoid resentments and hidden motives of one party staying. Would you speak more about this? Because I think this is just a realistic idea.
There was a book written about the time that Grace Kelly, the famous actress from the Kelly family of Philadelphia, married then Prince Rainier, His Serene Highness of Monaco. Someone made the quip that a woman is most sincere when she tells a millionaire that she loves him.
Or vice versa. Okay.
Or I agreed. It's very important to really understand that if there's a great disparity in wealth, probably the best way to solve it is to increase everybody's wealth. However, it's basically, if you came from the wrong side of the tracks, you're different from someone who came from the manor born.
Silver spoon in their mouth.
Yes.
Lucky's Turn Club.
You get to say that. I'm turning red.
Well, hopefully the listeners on Apple Podcasts are over age 18.
Yeah, it's fine. Incidentally, let me take off on a little tangent there. I greatly respected, and this would be a whole other podcast, Dr. Timothy Leary, the famous psychologist from Harvard. And he said, look, when you're conceived, you've already won a lottery. When you're born, you've won another lottery. And Doug Casey, the famous financial writer, who I guess now has moved from Argentina to Uruguay, he has a ranch probably in both places, or at least in Uruguay, said, if you were born in 20th century United States or Canada, you won some sort of cosmic lottery. and we say thank you. And I was born in not 20th century United States of America, California.
I was born in Texas.
Ah, Texas. What part?
San Antonio.
I've never been there. I'm told it's absolutely beautiful.
I agree with you. I think that to be born in an environment that is supportive, that is the Head Start. The Head Start is the Head Start.
And it's then what you do with it.
Absolutely.
And that's where the trust can come into play, is by providing the key thing: personnel, procedures, resources. And that's what it. And to circle back, it's important, and this is a little bit of trust procedure. When two spouses form a irrevocable common law trust and they're going to put money into it or corpus, they divide it all up and put it in separately, and you make sure that is documented in case there's interference from in-laws.
Absolutely. And I think that, to go back to your privacy point before, I think that privacy is so valuable. It's not just the anonymity to be able to walk into a grocery store or a post office and not be recognized for your assets or your face, etc. I think it's also just that, like you had said before, nobody wants to be a financial mark of, well, is that individual only friends with me because they think they're going to get something out of it? Are they only speaking to me because they've got a hidden motive? And I think that when the privacy can be just developed to the point that other people don't know your business, it lends to a certain amount of freedom that somebody can walk around and not be recognized by their net worth, and walk around and not worry about that other people are tracking their history. Like you mentioned, the baby girl trust, and when she grows up, there's somebody out there that's, waiting to target her or him.
Yes, either way.
Absolutely. I mean, people would like to feel safe in this world.
Or if there's a pink polka dotted Martian out there that we do not know about.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back about the value of privacy.
Let's throw out also the dangers of central bank digital currencies.
Oh, because everything's being tracked?
Yeah, and
in
basically,
system.
Yeah, a ledger, and if they do something you do not like, you're
turned off.
You're turned off. Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to circle back to the privacy again. So it's interesting. I think that with some members of the affluent today, either they're going to have to be willing to hire a public relations firm to handle their image, or they just don't play at all on social media. Because again, when you bring up privacy, they don't want to be, they take a picture at a certain restaurant and now somebody knows that individual's there, and they could, approach that person in that restaurant, or the individual has to publish on Instagram 24 hours later when they've left the restaurant.
Yeah, it's very important that you keep your privacy. In fact, the goal of the trust, our types of trust, is that you will keep a low key.
Yes.
And the trustee is the bridge between, if you will, the public and the private, or the private and the public. The trustee, he or she, has a foot in both worlds.
Yes. So, thank you for returning a third time, Howard. What would you say is your legacy vision for your life and the top 3 values you get to honor? And I'm just putting you on the spot again because I think it's important to be able to breathe life into it and be able to speak it into existence. Because whether somebody comes from a blue collar, a white collar, or a silver spoon background, we all can dream and aim higher.
Values. Number 1, honesty. Number 2, integrity. And number 3, kindness.
Okay. What would you like your legacy to be holistically?
Even more success than I have now. And obviously, at least a sprinkling of happiness.
Okay. Well, I know you work hard, Howard, whether it's on your public speaking, and you're always developing yourself personally. So you have a high benchmark, a high standard to always be growing.
There's always after the next step, there will be a step after that.
Yes. So no matter somebody's stage in life, it's always good to hold a vision.
In fact, it's the most successful people have short-term goals up to 6 months, medium-term goals 1 year, and long-term goals 5 years.
Or even up to 100 years if they're from a certain family.
Yes. Good enough.
Yes, yes. I wanted to read one other quote from Volume 1, and it reads, "Riches lie in what assets others hold and are willing to share with us." And I'd just like to finish out our conversation today with this idea of the vested interest, because I think oftentimes in today's world of scarcity, there can be this crab mentality of people pulling others down within the bucket. And in trust, when one can bring a group of people together that collaborate well, there's no crabs in the bucket type of mentality. It's how do we all lift each other, educate one another, and find great opportunities together.
To go back to the Kennedy family, the famous John F. Kennedy, the president, said, and I think I'm quoting open, almost exact words, "A rising tide lifts all boats." And there's another quote on the www.passingbooks website. It's by Walt Disney. It's one I found. Open quote, "There is more treasure in books than all the treasures in the Spanish of the Spanish Main," close quote. Again, there is more treasure in books than all the treasures of the Spanish Main, close quote. That's one of our rotating quotes on the website, along with the one that you caught earlier.
Yes. Are there any closing thoughts you would like to share, Howard? I started out today's podcast episode speaking about how there is going to be a transfer of wealth, specifically to women, over the next 3 to 5 years, representing about $30 trillion in opportunity by the end of the decade. And education is more important than ever now.
It's vital that if you have been miseducated, get properly educated, and if you've not been educated, you be properly educated. Because as you said, it's a rags to riches to rags stories tale. And unfortunately for most lottery winners or people coming to windfall, I understand that we're back where they were or worse within a few years. I believe it was a gentleman named Ward Hines who played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he won an MVP in the Super Bowl. He discovered this financial advisor was bilking him because what he did was he'd set up a series of car washes, perfectly good cash business, except he was siphoning off a bunch of the money and doing substandard construction. And of course, the most famous one to go to celebrity was Doris Day.
How about MC Hammer?
Doris Day. Doris Day was actually one of the back in the probably the 1970s. Her financial advisors, after her husband passed away, they were literally looting that estate. That's actually I understand if it's a very famous court case. Well, again, you want to make sure that you want to get the best people around you. That's a critical element. Surround yourself with the best people and see how much it will rub off.
Absolutely. The 5 closest people we surround ourselves with and learn from other people's tragedies so they don't become your tragedy. Because because life is hard sometimes. And it brings many
experience tests. To make this in modern language, experience is a hard teacher, yet some folks will know no other way.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm going to read out my closing paragraph, but before I do, I just would like to say thank you once again, Howard, for being a guest to speak about the subject of trust, because I think
my pleasure.
It is financial literacy for those that are going to come into an inheritance, or what you might call the mechanics of inheritance, to be smart about it and to get that knowledge, the education, the support, whether that's socially, professionally, all of it, so that they can, as you had mentioned, have all tides rise. And because it's when there's choice, people can make different decisions. But Also, the people around them might change.
I will recommend a book. It's called The Executive Jungle by Irwin L., I think, Rodman, industrial psychologist. And he talked about various people, how they fit in various positions. Essentially, what he said was, know who you are. Know what type of occupation is best for you. And again, surround yourself with the best people you can. And he was a great asset to me at one point in my life, and I dearly miss him. He's been gone for about 15 years now. Good man.
Yes. Thank you, Howard.
My pleasure.
Okay. In closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach and consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the move or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself in new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. Thank you for joining us today, and remember, I coach people on the subject of personal legacies. If you're tuning in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, etc., please remember to rate and review, share with your family and friends. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and thank you, Howard, for speaking into your legacy once again.